Dobar ден, почитувани гледачи. Ова е емисијата Македонско издание, која што се емитува секоја втора сабота во 12:30 часот попладне на Роджерс телевизија, каналите 10, 63, 84 и во High Definition 510. И во денешнава емисија ќе ве информираме за поважните настани во нашава комуна, како и ќе проследиме наша македонска музика. Јас сум Поведа Пискачева, уредникот и продуцентот на оваа ваша програма, која што ве информира и ве забавува. На самиот почеток сакам да ви се заблагодарам што одбрахте во наредните 30 на минути да бидете заедно со нас. А сега следува и следнава порака. За да набавите возило со врвен квалитет по поволни финансиски услови, јавете се кај Дени на телефон 905-881-3900 и прашајте за спектакуларниот попуст за месец ноември. Освен Денис Пасоевиќ, кој е генерален менеджер, можете да ги побарате Бане Јокиć, финансиски менеджер, и Рада Вазиć, која што е бизнис менеджер. Нова локација каде што можете да ги добиете сите овие поволности е во Хајпарк на 3275 Dundas Street, West Toronto, со телефонот 416-762-7537. Емисијава ја започнуваме со материјалот што го снимивме на 4-та глобална конференција на Обединетата македонска дијаспора што се одржа минатата година во Скопје, Македонија, а по повод одбележувањето на 100-та годишнина од трагичната поделба на нашата земја. На конференцијата, чија тема беше 2013 100 години после Букурешкиот договор, прв зеде учество господинот Срđan Керим, познат дипломат, економист, професор и бизнисмен, кој во исто време е и прв добитник на UMD Macedonian Heritage Public Service Award во 2009 година. Во проложение да го проследиме вториот дел од неговиот говор.
From the audience, I can see that there are prominent number of historians, and I don't have any intention to meddle in their work and to allow myself to be a self-declared historian. I will leave that to the professionals. History is important for all of us since we learn from our history. But if you ask me, the most important thing is the outcome, the result. 1878 was the year in which the Berlin Congress was held, and the delegates of the Berlin Congress on the 1st of July 1997, if they could be able to see Berlin then, miracle was struck, because that day Macedonia, the country that they wiped out, opened its first diplomatic representation there. So the result is what counts. The outcome is what's important. And that is why I think that Winston Churchill was right when he said, in the clash between the past and the present, the future is always the one to suffer. And we cannot allow ourselves to have that. And that is why I am a supporter of the motto suggesting that we should look forward. We should learn from the past, but we shouldn't be frustrated because of that. Every nation has frustrations if they only turn towards the past and what history brought them. After Bucharest, we shouldn't forget the two most terrible wars happened on the European soil initiated by Europe. The First and the Second World War, with millions of victims, with trauma and atrocities and consequences, not only in Europe, but in the world. But in that period, the Macedonian state has been constituted and established. The statutory status is not recognized only with the entry of the Macedonian in the United Nations, but back in 1945, our parents, their generation, fought along the Russians and the Americans and other allies, and they won the Second World War. And as a result of that, of the war being won, we have fought for the right to have our own country founded. So the territory of the Republic of Macedonia are not won on a conference table, but in a war. They were won over, and they cannot be ignored, and they cannot be wiped out. And because of that, I cannot see a reason for anyone to intimidate us, or for us to be frustrated that someone can take away our name or our identity. In that respect, quoting Sir Winston Churchill, I would like to also add on some other aspects. First of all, we are a part of Europe. And it's not by accident that the EU flag is here among other flags. In the idea of giving birth to the European Union, Macedonia is an integral part. Macedonian history is a history of civilization, of the cultural benefits of Europe. And the values that today are being shared among the European nations, we constitute a part of those values, and that should not be mixed with the Copenhagen criteria and other benchmarks that are required for the entry into the European Union. That's another issue altogether. In this complex Balkan puzzle, we have our state, our own state, in a state that is accepted and recognized across the world.
За сите ваши потреби да купите ново или користено возило под поволни финансиски услови и технички да их одржувате дени или рада од Nissan Willowdale ќе ви помогнат на наш јазик 905-881-3900.
Овогодишниот македонски филмски фестивал се одржа на 25 и 26 октомври годинава во Carlton Cinema во Торонто. Камерата на македонско издание беше присутна и ги забележа импресиите на гледачите на документарниот филм Сведоци Канада, сниман за преживеаните деца бегалци кои што денес живеат во Канада.
So before we begin this movie, I just wanted to say a few words about it thematically. August 10th, 2013 marked the centennial of the Treaty of Bucharest and the end of the Second Balkan War, the end of the Ottoman Empire, and the partition of Macedonia. The history of the Balkans in the 20th century reverberated with fallout from that partition. Bulgarian attempts to reclaim its San Stefano borders, Serbia's claims, by some as late as the 1990s, that Macedonia was southern Serbia, and the Greek mythology that Greece has an unbroken history since antiquity, and the continued denial into the 21st century of minorities living in the modern state carved from Ottoman territories. As borders are drawn and redrawn, the people living in those border regions are often lost in the shuffle. We cannot remake the past, but we can give voice to those who have lived too close to history in its making. We must challenge the fiction that Greece is, will be, and was, stretching back to antiquity, a mono-ethnic state. We must challenge all such mythologies in every nation state, giving voice to the complexities of actual lives lived in a world composed of multilingual, multi-ethnic, multi-gendered, multi-faith, multi-political factioned states. Thank you very much.
The Jews a na Macedonians. Сега, ако почнем с това, се на цели другите ке ама. Нека вели ама колко саке. Let them try to justify it. The point is, right now, these three identities today are also being most impressed by all the world's countries by distorting history. Историята така е писана е ка тие са кае по-бурко. Ама трябва ние да можем да му речеме, хей, не е така. И ние сега не можем да речеме нещо, ама ако можем да се събереме с еврейците и с мусламите, I mean even with the ones from the Egyptians. And what I want to do is I want to get the native people of North America, индиянците ще беят тук. Да пометваме целивия нации бе under the control of the people that were here. Кой бе бе? Англия, Франция, Belgium, Spain and Portugal. Тия петте държави, най-главните. Най-главната държава на това време беше Русия. Ама кай най-главната държава, Русия, рече, слушай, Македония е под under the control of the Muslims for 600 years. Русия ке се бори против нели и еднъж почна Русия да се бори против. Рече, ми трябва помощ. We have pet them were under the control of the Catholics. And because they were under the control of the Catholics, they did not want Russia to go into the Mediterranean. So they created, they invented Greece. When they invented Greece, all of what was written in the press was what they wrote. But they controlled the press. Всичко, що беше писано, ти го имае. Ти го писае и седна другите така го лапи и седне истата работа целият народ. Сега ние, as a teacher, I can go back to the teachers and all the teachers, ама не е верно. И ти ме, защо не е верно? Само трябва да му кажа не е верно. Сега тие с законите, темните закони, могат да се върте и да направим право. Ама сами не можем да правим това работа, трябва да са цели. Идеята тук е 99 на 100 от нациите на целия свет на едно време или друго време бе под контрол от вие главните. И вие главните що праве, да индиянците, що бе тук в Канада, will send them to my school, they must learn English, must learn our language, must do this, must do that. И сега индиянците, like hell they will. И Американци не.
What do you think about the movie that you just saw?
Well, I learned a great deal out of watching this film. The interviews were quite informative. I've lived with my wife, who's Macedonian, for over 20 years, and out of all that time, I've not really followed or known the story as much as I do now. So I was really quite surprised.
The film was really put together as biographies of everybody, but it's very touching. I was very emotional throughout the whole movie. I would like for other people to learn about the history and to really know what Macedonia is all about and how many people we actually have all over the world. So I am thankful that something has been done. And I hope it gets out for everyone to see. I mean, I tell my kids some history that I know, but there's some things I still don't know myself, which I learned today myself.
Денеска видовме, бевте веќе учесник во овој филм. Svedoci. A što mislite, kako go napravija film od konačnog?
Odličan. Mnogo hubав film. Da.
Rob Sandalović, the famous son of Olga Sandalović. Okay, you know that your mom is Macedonian, and what is that you learned today more about that?
Well, I've heard the stories before. My mother's told me, and I've read and seen other movies. But this is a fantastic documentary to put it all together, and it's great that these stories were told. The filmmaker did a great job of pulling the stories out of people. You know, that sometimes talking to a grandparent or an elder, they might not want to tell you the stories, but this was a great filmmaker who was able to get some detail out of these people.
Olga Sandalović, one of the witnesses. What do you think? How did you perceive the film?
For me, it was very emotional, and I was quite surprised. I was the only Canadian-born Macedonian interviewed, and I had forgotten all about this. I had no idea that this was what the film was about. But it was so moving to hear these stories, even though I have heard them, I know about them. It's not that I have not known about the death of Begalci and spoken to them and known their stories, known people that were Begalci. I had a cousin who was born in Tashkent who lives in Bitola now. Hearing these stories, and I say, these stories must be told. They must be seen by everyone. And I think these stories, this documentary, has to be seen by the more Macedonians. More Macedonians, but to reach out to the Canadian people. They have to hear our stories. Stories are being told about many that have suffered under the hands of oppressors. It's time, and I thank the director and filmmaker and also the Film Society in Toronto for bringing this documentary here. My son has known these stories, but to see them, my daughter, I call her my daughter, who has heard these stories but found these things so moving. So moving. I can't tell you, it was so powerful for me. I think of our Macedonian people, we have a long way to go in telling these stories.
We're talking to Athena, mom, Macedonian, Jewish father.
Yes.
How this story is familiar to you?
Well, I would say the most familiar part is the stories that I heard from my Baba, Baba Nika. And because she came to Canada in 1920, so she had memories from before that. She was born in 1900. And I remember her talking about the Turks and the Ottoman Empire and having guns buried in the floor in the kitchen to fight the Turks. I remember her talking about the Greeks and how difficult that was. But very small little pieces of story. And so as a child, when you hear that, it doesn't have, I mean, it sinks in. But hearing the stories in the film today really deepened it, really broadened what I understand about what their experience would have been and the kind of pain that they lived through. It was very, it really, so it brought home what the actual experience was in a very moving way.
There was a question from the audience to the director of the film. Why so many other stories are not heard, like the Jewish Holocaust, like so many tragedies are not out there. So you're a product of two people who were exposed to these atrocities. What do you think? What is your opinion? Why is Macedonian question still so unknown?
It's a good question, and I think Christina Kramer, who responded a little bit to that question, had a great insight into it, which has a lot to do with when you've demolished a people in a way, you you get rid of a lot of the infrastructure of a culture, and you lose the intelligentsia, who are the ones who will produce culture in a certain way. The folk people will produce culture in another way. So there hasn't been a sort of collective that could produce those stories, and I think Christina really hit that quite well. I'm sure there's so many other reasons too. I think that, having not have a nation that has that name on it has had that experience too, where people don't know it. I remember being a child, and my classmates would say, "Well, where are you from?" or "What's your background?" And I would say, "I'm Jewish and I'm Macedonian." And they'd say, "What's Macedonian?" That people didn't know that word. They didn't know the name. And that was always a very strange and interesting thing to me. So getting those stories out of all of the peoples it's complicated, and there's many stories to tell.
Thank you very much, Athena.
Thank you.
А сега продолжуваме со една музичка numera.
30 март беше, ношија во 12 сато. Камбаната клепна.
За сите ваши потреби да купите ново или користено возило под поволни финансиски услови и технички да их одржувате дени или рада од Nissan Willowdale ќе ви помогнат на наш јазик 905-881-3900.
А сега следуваат неколку информации. Црквата Свети Климент Охридски од Торонто на 6 декември годинава ќе ја прослави својата храмова слава, а воедно и патронот на Македонската православна црква, Охридска архиепископија Свети Климент Охридски, со свечен банкет во големата сала на црквата. Цената на билетите е $30. За информации и резервации јавете се на 416-421-7451. Канадското македонско место во Торонто е пензионерски дом кој ви обезбедува угодно и хармонично живење. За повеќе информации побарете ја Златка на 416-755-9231. За професионално и поволно дизајнирање на веб-сајтови побарете ги TJ Hosting на 647-547-3061. И секако читете македонски вести сега и со детални информации и важни надписи за македонската комуна во Торонто. За грижлива нега на вашата коса и нејзино професионално стилирање побарете ја Елизабета на 647-281-5501. Во недела на 23 ноември 2014 година во Balmy Beach Club ќе се одржи аукција на слики во организација на Canadians for Children at Health Risk. За повеќе информации јавете се на 416-762-3541. Почитувани гледачи, тоа е се што подготвивме за ова 345-та емисија на македонско издание. До следната наша нова емисија, кога повторно ќе се дружиме, ви благодарам за вашето ценито внимание, пријатно и довидување.